what they've been through, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and how much they care and how much they really, really want to make a difference for themselves and their friends. So I think that we are all focusing on school because this is what all of our kids have in common. We do not have the same pediatrician. We do not have the same insurance plan or home address, but all of our kids go to school each day. In addition to working with our schools, we also need to be having these conversations with our healthcare providers, human resources departments, insurance providers, and within our own families. I'm speaking tonight about what I knew, what I didn't know, what I know now, and to talk about the pervasive effects of prolonged anxiety and the importance of early intervention and treatment, and to talk a little bit that the reactions to trauma that some of your students and friends and young people may be having are not necessarily because of the immediate situation, but oftentimes they can bring up feelings or past experiences that are unpleasant, and it can take them back, set them back quite a bit when things like this happen, whether they're directly impacted or not. The last thing I want to say is that I did not consider myself a gun owner. We had never purchased a firearm. We acquired through family deaths and such. They were very secure. They were stored out of sight and out of mind for the most part. So that one's really hard. So some of the problems that we're seeing with it are old, but even the problems that were old, the bullying and things of that nature that we may have had in our youth, there's a unique spin to this time, and they're much more pronounced. So please set aside, as you listen to the information tonight, whatever stereotypes that you may have, and try to listen with a fresh set of ears. I'm speaking tonight to share how this has affected me to the extent which I understand at this point. And I'm here tonight to advocate for the students who are friends, siblings, cousins, grandkids, neighbors, paper boys. They're in and about our community. So every situation, every story is different. So I am speaking specifically to mine. And in our case, we were aware that my son, Ben, was dealing with anxiety. He also was diagnosed with ADHD, and it's inattentive type, which affected his executive functioning skills. And so, the combination of pressures at home, pressures that he put on himself from athletics, school performance, he is a natural empath. He felt deeply some of the things that were going on in the world and how they were affecting him and his friends. And so when we started to seek treatment, the system is very disjointed. Often it's not as easy as just taking your child to the pediatrician. If there is a therapy component, a psychotherapy component, or any medication needed, oftentimes the pediatrician is a good place to start, but you may be referred to other practices for treatment of these conditions. What we found in my situation, and one of the reasons why it's so important that we come together as a community, is this does not work very well for families. It's very difficult to maintain school presence, and the system is just disjointed overall. As we sought treatment, a lot of things became a parent with anxiety. And I will say that even kids who do not experience behavior or disruptive behaviors can also absolutely be experiencing anxiety, um, uh, uh, suicidal thoughts, depressive thoughts, and things of that nature. Um, so with anxiety comes physical symptoms, and the physical symptoms affect attendance. They're very real. And currently, there's no way to call your child out because they may have not slept all night, or because maybe they're in the throes of a panic attack when the bus is coming. Additionally, school attendance is followed by the state, and it was very disheartening for us to actually receive a letter regarding our son's school attendance because he had missed so much school, because we were going to pediatrician appointments, psychotherapy appointments, nurse practitioner appointments, along with the sports physicals, physical therapy for a collarbone injury. And each time that Ben was out of school, obviously you're missing instruction, you get further and further behind. The technology situation with our kids, we assume that young people adopt and know technology immediately. And particularly with kids that have executive functioning skills or organizational struggles. The technology added another component that was complex and very difficult for us to manage in our family. It was great to have everything in one place, but each class may have done it a little differently, and there were many layers to it. And often, in order to get to some of the resources, there's passwords involved, there's access codes, there's sign-ons, log-ons. And those are all things that, our kids, while granted they're good on social media and certain applications, it certainly doesn't mean they are great on every application. And integrating some of the technology into the children's school days and workflows can be extremely difficult for some students. As we talk tonight about signs and symptoms and things to look for, our kids are reaching out to us, but it may be in ways that we're not seeing or we're not understanding. And I'm very privileged to have a close relationship with a lot of the young people in our community. And I can tell you that they are isolating themselves among groups. They are participating in activities, but finding moments to go off by themselves. They are going to school, but oftentimes they are finding places to be alone and needing quiet time during the day. And oftentimes there are a lot of students, or there are a portion of students who even take their lunch and they will eat it in, the restroom, the locker rooms, secretaries' offices, hang out with a favorite teacher. And, a lot of that can be fun and innocent, but that, in our case, was something that we were not aware our son was doing. And that, could have been maybe just another indication of the seriousness of his thoughts. The last thing I want to say, I think, in support of our children is that really we live in a high achieving community, and that is one of the wonderful things about our township. Our kids are very high achieving kids. They have more empathy, ability, information, and the wherewithal to do more than we were ever able to do in our lives. And so they put a very, very high standard on themselves with their schoolwork, with their athletics, extracurriculars, philanthropy. Our youth they're very much into philanthropy and helping each others. And so the way we talk about things, if we take a situation and comment on a grade or a performance, or if someone's resting maybe extra long or something like that, that's one thing, one moment in time for us. But how the youth today might be processing that and receiving that, they take it very, very much to the heart and very much want to please and excel. And so their reaction can sometimes be much different than what we are anticipating. I think that's about all. Again, I want to emphasize that not every situation is the same. In fact, they're all different. But if we listen to the materials tonight, and if we come together as a community, not to handle people with kid gloves, but to treat people with the respect and the empathy and the goodwill that they deserve, we can make a difference in the lives of our young people. So thank you all very much for listening. I'm going to turn it back over to Erica now.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. That was incredible insight from a beautiful woman and her family, and of course, close friends in the community. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for that. And for those of you just joining, so my name is Dr. Erica Birkley. I'm a psychologist and associate professor at UC. As a quick reminder, I'll mention it at the end of the talk as well. If you signed up, you will receive a recording of this presentation and a list of all the slide content tomorrow. There are some slides that I am going to encourage you to take a picture of a QR code, text that or share that with your friends. If you have teens in your home or adolescents and you feel like it would be appropriate to bring them in on this conversation, please grab them and pull them over to the screen. We absolutely invite this to be a family-based activity, something that maybe you could have a family-based conversation afterward. So to kick us off, this presentation is evidence-based in peer-reviewed science, right? What a mouthful. And so what in the heck is that, right? What we mean by evidence-based is that it's based in a solid foundation of gathering information from a broad spectrum of sources. So we're talking about, for example, thousands of kids and teens when I report on some of those statistics. I'm going to be sharing with you strategies and approaches that have been shown effective at things like increasing child and teen sharing with their parents. We'll also go over behavioral steps shown to build trust across the family. With this science-based information, just so you know, this isn't kind of my 2 cents or personal advice. I might share a personal anecdote from time to time. I will let you know when that's coming just for me. This science-based information, just like any other science-based information you expect to get when you take your child to the primary care doctor, right, must pass rigorous evaluation from other scientists in the field. And much of this information I'm presenting today, I cite sources at the bottom. You can follow up those sources or click on web links, and is sponsored by very prestigious and trustworthy sources such as the American Academy of Pediatrics and the National Institute of Mental Health. So a daunting slide, still emotionally hits me hard. That not too long ago, talking about just a couple of years ago, suicide passed homicide as the second leading cause of death among our young people. That's through teens into early 20s. The leading cause of death, if you're curious, is accidents. This was recent as well. So we're talking not even within 2 weeks ago, our US Surgeon General issued an advisory on a youth mental health crisis. I quoted him here and I wanted to read a couple of these quotes because they're so profound. So we're talking even before the pandemic, we have an alarming number of young people that are struggling with very intense emotion states like depression or hopelessness, thoughts of suicide or ending their life. Those rates continue to go up at an alarming pace. The COVID-19 pandemic, on top of that already existing mental health crisis, means that some of these students, their experiences have been altered at home, school, and in the community, right? For example, not being able to practice or present an orchestra concert because of COVID-19 regulations, or having not being able to attend a certain athletic event because of COVID-19 exposure. These precautions that we take to directly address the COVID-19 pandemic also have, of course, a wave and a ripple effect on our teens and young people. And in particular, the effect on their mental health has been devastating. I love this last quote. He said, "The future well-being of our country depends on how we support and invest in the next generation." So the mental health epidemic that is placing our kids at risk for suicide is real, it's genuine, it's legitimate. In just 10 years, again, pre-COVID-19, the number of high school students who reported persistent hopelessness or sadness. So what persistent means is that it's lingering. That teen is attempting to try to address it, for example, and it keeps circling back around. It rose by 40%. So now we're talking about an issue of importance, something that we'd want a mental health provider to touch base with that student on. We're talking about more than 1 in 3 students. That was in our state, as well as all the states across the US. Even more sobering, suicidal behaviors have also increased at a very similar rate. And so we've got 19%, close to 1 in 5 students pre-pandemic have seriously contemplated attempting to take their life. That serious contemplation, again, warrants mental health intervention. We're talking about therapy, or what we call psychotherapy. That's 1 in 5. So thinking about, our neighborhood, right? Just my street, we have more than 5 kids who are adolescents and teens, right? Given those statistics, we're thinking at least one of those could be at risk. So really, as I go over these statistics, I really do want you to think about your neighborhood, your street, your kids, and how this might impact them. 16% have made a suicide plan in the prior year. I was shocked by that statistic. I'm sure you guys are too. Again, this is almost a half increase. And the statistics were pre-COVID-19. We haven't collected them and disseminated them, spread them out, and shared them since the pandemic. And the strong guess is that those rates have only gone up. Between 2007 and 2018, again, suicide rates, those are where there was actual attempt at ending their own life, increased by 57%. Early estimates show more than 6,000 suicides among this age group in 1 year, in 2020. There are with anything you guys see in blue and underlined, when you get a copy of these slides, should have a web link that you can click on and then get more information or read a study or research finding further. All right, so we set the stage for this is a problem. We know this is a problem. Thank you so much for being here and investing your valuable time and your family's time in coming together as a community to learn about what we can do with this problem and issue. So to set the stage, I know I have a 5-year-old in Maddox, and sometimes I forget that she has a child brain, right? And think that she should know or understand or be able to cope with things similarly to me or my husband. The truth is that the adolescent and teen brain is still under development, incredibly important development. They are not adults in terms of different ways that they handle emotion. We'll talk about impulsivity, kind of acting in the moment, and what we call executive control of decision making, which I'll define here in a few minutes. So borrowing the slide from the National Institute of Mental Health. So with this particular slide, we're looking at, again, with those pictures down there, you have a brain for someone who's my daughter's age, a 5-year-old, and you can see the front end of the rainbow, like the red and yellow, are less fully mature sections of the brain, where the blue and purple are parts of the brain that are more fully developed and able to kind of operate similarly to what we'd expect a fully developed adult. And you see there the preteen brain and the teen brain. And if you notice, and you can even kind of see on this slide, really looking at the front part of that brain that is still undergoing development. So the front part of that brain is called the prefrontal cortex. And it's right under your forehead. So when I'm working with patients in therapy, I say right under here, right? This part of our brain is still developing into our 20s. For females, that can be our earlier 20s, where we tend to see that developed. For males, it tends to be a little later, the mid 20s, where that's fully developed. Now, why is that so important? That part of the brain is the part that regulates or helps us to decide what to do. It helps us plan for events, think through consequences. It helps us calm our other areas of the brain that are more emotion centered or can be reactive or prone to kind of have us act in the moment on a strong emotion. Our front part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, one of its jobs is to quiet or calm that emotion response, especially when it's not giving us the full picture, or maybe it's an emotion or reaction we're having that's natural to a situation, like we're feeling lonely, but then the front part of our brain can remind us that there are people in our lives that love us and care about us and what to do if or when that emotion comes up. Again, that level of thinking is still under a lot of development in our adolescence and in our teens. So there are, I'm going to talk about and break down more differences. Developmental just means kind of how far a child is kind of along in the steps we would assume that they would reach at certain ages, of course, and there's differences in between kids as well. And regulate is another word for control, kind of manage, right? Emotions and behavior. So when we're looking at adolescents to teens and their brain specifically, we're looking at ages about 10 to 18 or so. And this is what we're seeing. So they're not just sensitive, they're hypersensitive to what we call emotion-based processing. Technical, term for that is the limbic system. And what we mean by that is not only, let's say you watch a family movie with your teen or adolescent, right? And, especially we're watching a lot of Disney movies right now, or even Star Wars movies, and there's a part that's maybe really sad. Our teens are likely to experience in adolescence that sadness at a much deeper level, much more intense than we might experience it. So you might look over, this happens with my 5-year-old, and she's got tears rolling down her cheeks because she's really sensitive to that emotion content. Where I might be able to think, oh, it's a movie. Yes, it's sad, but I know that it's not necessarily happening right in front of me. Their impulsivity is not kept in check. So again, the prefrontal cortex, one of its jobs is kind of to quiet or turn off some of those impulses or urges to do something. We all have them, right? Like I have urges to go and grab a chocolate throughout the day. And the front part of my brain then can kind of inhibit that urge, for example, and remind me, I've already had 5, and if I eat anymore, I'm going to have a stomach ache. So teens are much less likely to have an urge come up, like potentially an urge to harm themselves in some way, and be able to shut that down. Teens and adolescents, they also have an increased sensitivity, again, brain-based, to things like rejection. We know that, of course, there's increases happening with hormones and puberty. Puberty, once a young person reaches puberty, they're typically at higher risk for experiencing thoughts related to self-harm or suicide and acting on them. Adolescents have difficulty, and teens considering all the consequences. Again, that takes that fully developed brain to be able to think that all the way through, especially if they're experiencing strong emotion. And then there is a much, much greater focus on what their peers think. And as parents, you see this happening, right? That when your kids are maybe in elementary school, they're very much come to you and maybe come to you first and look to you for support and guidance, maybe automatically. And then as they age, it's way more about what their friends think or what their friends might do or say. Some of that can be very positive and naturally supportive. Other times that can put undue pressure on our young children and teens. So switching over to the fully developed brain, right? How is that different? And again, we're talking 20s. So even halfway through, a young person's journey into kind of what they do after high school and navigating that. The rational kind of logical thinking, really being able to fully think something through, short-term and long-term consequences, is now on board. They're going to have greater control over those urges, take fewer risks, less what we call sensation seeking, kind of seeking out maybe risky environments to experience certain intense emotion, and increase decision making based on kind of what their opinion is, and less so decided or influenced by what their peers think. They'll also have a greater control of how to manage emotion. It's important to say that these individuals, including adults, people with a fully developed brain that does not fully protect against what we're talking about today, like struggles and issues with mental health symptoms or thoughts of suicide. Our young people, main takeaway for this is that they are especially vulnerable in these ways. Now, talking about the brain just a little more, right? So we've got a neat picture up of the brain here. When a brain is exposed to trauma, right? And recently we've had an unexpected traumatic loss. We have had 2 recent within our own district here in Anderson Township. And what happens when a brain is exposed to trauma is there can be more sensitivity in that emotion focused area or center. And so that area, if you can see my cursor, is kind of towards the middle lower part here. And one of those areas is called the amygdala. And one of the amygdala's jobs is to perceive threat. So it's kind of like if your threat center is hypersensitive, you can imagine it like a car alarm for your teen or your adolescent. And it is now kind of going off even when no one's breaking in, right? So it's going off if a cat brushes against it, or there's a lightning storm, or a basketball hits it. And so that fear based and threat-based reaction can be more hypersensitive. And what happens then is that can make it more difficult for them to fully use the front part of their brain, which is up here, the prefrontal cortex, to do things like study and navigate difficulties in relationships, and also to help calm that threat response when it's going off, but they are not actually under threat in that moment, for example, at home next to you on the couch. With this focus on the brain, as we move forward in the presentation, it's so important to think of mental health as a brain-based issue. One of the main things I please want you to take from the talk, just like we don't question other brain-based conditions, for example, Alzheimer's disease or seizures, okay? So transitioning to a major piece of this talk, right? Signs something's not okay, and strategies for how to listen as a parent, as a caregiver, as an adult in your teen or adolescent's life. So these are, again, evidence-based factors that increase risk for thoughts about suicide and behaviors related to suicide. So unfortunately, one of the strongest predictors of future behavior is past behavior. So any individual that has attempted to take their life, has attempted to complete suicide, they are at increased risk for attempting another time. As a caregiver or a parent, again, one of the somewhat alarming things is that we may not be informed by our teen or adolescent that they have attempted before in the past. So some of the strategies we'll talk about having that conversation, opening that dialogue, making that a safe place to say, it's all right. I like to borrow words from Tiffany. I love you, you matter. I want to know these things so that we can come together as a unit, as a family, and together make sure that you don't have to go through something like that. Again, get you the help you need. If an individual, teen or adolescent, has a friend of somebody with a recent attempt, or also any like close person that they might love or care for, including like a family member or a neighbor, it puts them at increased risk. If there's a history in your family of somebody who has attempted or completed suicide, again, they're at increased risk, both from a social standpoint, but also what we know is more of a genetic component as well. That some of us have vulnerabilities that run in our family, just like vulnerabilities for high cholesterol, which is in my family, right? Mental health, again, think of it in a very similar way. Vulnerabilities for anxiety tend to run in families. If there's an acute stressor that your child is maybe going through, or your teen, again, that's something to look out for. If they're acting impulsively, they're doing things without thinking, and maybe those are having consequences that are getting in their way or that are unusual, to take note of that. Shame, if an individual is experiencing acute embarrassment or shame, and some of that can happen in environments that we are not aware of as parents or caregivers, that is an appropriate, a very important, emotion to attend to and address. Also, as we talked about with the brain being more sensitive, those with a history of trauma exposure or abuse or neglect, thoughts about suicide, as well as certain mental health conditions, for example, anxiety or depression. Now, thinking about, again, how can I tell if something might be wrong, right? And these are some quotes we've pulled from individuals that have struggled with depression or anxiety. You might hear your teen or young person say things like, I just want an escape. I wish I could just not wake up tomorrow. I don't want to face another day. I want it to go away. I want to make it stop. Again, if you hear language like that, incredibly important to attend to it and draw it out with strategies I'll talk about here in a little while. As we talked about, what's really tricky, many things are tricky about this, assessing kind of risk for suicide, but also looking into our young person's mental health. One of those things is puberty. So puberty is going to bring out some expected and neurotypical, which all of our kids are not neurotypical, but some neurotypical changes in their mood or irritability or tendency to kind of push parents away, right? Maybe stay in their room more, or be on their phone or device more. You likely, as a caregiver or a parent, right, have a good understanding of what is typical, so to speak, for your teen or young person. And so it's important that we have eyes open, even as busy and as fast as our world moves, to your child's reactions to events and stress. Please trust your instincts. As a caregiver, if your young person's behaviors, thoughts, or emotions are unusual, and as quickly as you're able to, engage them in conversation. Other things to look out for are kind of changes in what we call kind of drives, just kind of natural kind of forces that motivate us to kind of go about our day and get our basic human needs met. And so if your teen or young person is really having major changes with sleep or energy or fatigue, if their motivation is taking a hit, it's noticeable, right? Maybe usually they take care of a chore around the house, no problem. And all of a sudden you're asking them 3-4 times to bring their laundry down or to clear the table. Appetite changes are also a big one. So these are body-based signs that something is not right. Something is going on. And if it's not, some of these things might be disturbed by an acute stressor. So for many of you listening, probably a large portion, your young person is likely adjusting and reacting to the recent heavy losses that we've experienced as a district. If their functioning is not returning to normal, or it's what we call significantly impairing, bothersome, getting in the way, then again, that is something that's more alarming or something you want to pay attention to. Now, additional warning signs are things like isolation, maybe an increase in certain substance uses you may or may not be aware of as a parent or caregiver, but something definitely to ask about. Like alcohol or vaping, maybe a sudden drop in how they're doing in school. If they're talking about or have a preoccupation with things like death or dying or suicide. If they're engaging in risky behaviors like unsafe sex or risky driving. If they're telling you that they're hopeless, they're like nihilistic, right? I had a young person I work with said, I just was doom scrolling on social media, right? Reading all of the worst news. And there's unfortunately so much of it. If they're researching any kind of methods to end their life or acquiring weapons or means for suicide or self-harm, all warning signs to note and to act on. Again, as I go through the presentation, please feel free to take a snapshot or a picture of any of these slides. You're also going to get a copy of the slides and recording tomorrow for those of you that registered, which is likely everyone. Now, I'm going to break down some strategies based on the developmental age of your kids, right? So you're going to have a very different conversation if you're talking to a 12-year-old versus a 17-year-old. And many of you have adolescents and teens maybe in the same household. And so if your kid is developmentally younger, so it could be before puberty, doesn't have to be, but they're more on that adolescent side. You want to focus on a lot of body-based changes and upset. So especially for those of us who don't have a lot of mental health is not really a familiar place, or you're not quite sure about it, or it's never really been talked about in your family, or maybe the family you grew up with your parents or caregivers. One of the earliest things to notice is your body off? Like, is your stomach been hurting when you're going to school? Hey, I noticed that I heard you up last night a couple of times moving around and in the kitchen. That's unusual, right? Is there something going on? It's important to help your kids identify and name their emotions. So even having a kid just be able to say what they're feeling, this counts for adults too. So parents, please model this. That in of itself helps us better control the emotion. So if I can say, okay, my stomach hurts before I get on the bus, I think that's because I'm worried, right? There's the emotion. It's fear-based, right? Anxiety is some of that is that worry and fear-based emotion that's causing issues in that child or kid's life. With a kid that's developmentally younger, you might phrase questions like, have you ever thought about hurting yourself or ending your life? With many people, they might be very reluctant or hesitant to even bring up things like that with their kids. Please know that those conversations have been shown to reduce the child's risk of acting on those thoughts, not increase it. This is absolutely a conversation to have and check in regularly, just like we check about other safety behaviors with our young person. Like, are you taking your phone with you and having our emergency contacts in there? Are you driving safe? Are you not texting and driving? Those sorts of things. Mental health needs to be a check-in, just like all of those other things we already look after. Are you wearing your seatbelt, right? For grief and loss processing, specific again to what's happened in the past 2 weeks. You can, if you're trying to explain what happened with loss due to suicide, again, if the child or kid is a lot younger, you can talk about the brain. I would encourage you to talk about the brain no matter what age, right? But talking about like his brain was sick, for example, right? They had an illness. Watch for when a child might be satisfied with your response or explanation. So you only give as much information as you think they need to say like, all right, I get it, right? Then you don't have to keep going and giving more detail. So check in with your kid on where that kind of line may be. And then just as Tiffany did in a beautiful way, provide assurance and security, like we love you, we're here for you. If you want to take a snapshot of this, I'd really recommend it. I know there's a ton of words on the slide. It's really meant to help give you an emotion vocabulary as a family or a connected unit, right? If you're a caregiver or a provider. And so, especially with trauma and trauma processing, many of these emotions are likely to be felt by the young people in your home. So, for example, issues related to them feeling safe or trust and how to navigate trust, fairness and justice, how it's accepted, how it's impacted their sense of acceptance and control. What emotions might be related to things like their dignity or their worth. So you can, I do this when I'm in a therapy session with families, with kids, with teens, is ask them, sometimes prompting a person or giving them a list of emotions helps them really specifically narrow it down and say, no, it's not that I felt upset, it's that I felt ashamed. Okay, and that's going to give you a much more rich conversation and help you identify and validate those emotions at a much stronger level. If your kid's developmentally older, ask them more specific questions. It's not that you can't ask them if they're more developmentally younger. Again, you are the parent or caregiver. I trust your intuition. These are guidelines. But you want to be more specific and you want to give options. So even when I do this with adults, of course, the term self-harm is not super familiar to a lot of us, right? And so asking them if they've ever cut themselves or engaged in burning or scratching, hair pulling or severe skin picking might not be a self-harm thing. It might be like an automatic pilot, more anxiety thing too, right? So asking about the behavior and then being more curious about what it's connected to in those conversations. Ask them about if they've had any thoughts of suicide. If you use the term thoughts of suicide, they might not respond, or they might say, no, that's, I'm good, versus saying, want me to escape, right? Feeling like you cannot go through tomorrow, right? If they endorse thoughts of suicide, they say, yeah, that's happening for me, mom or dad, right? Then you're going to ask, have you thought about a plan? Have you thought about a way that you might do that? Have you rehearsed or practiced a way to end your life? Do you intend to act on those thoughts? These are the questions we also ask as mental health providers. And what we're doing is trying to get a glimpse at how acute, how urgent the need is to respond with emergency resources. So if they're telling you they're having thoughts and they've rehearsed a plan, they have a plan in mind, they have a backup plan, and or they intend to, like, I'm going to put this into motion, right? I'm going to make sure I don't wake up tomorrow, right? That's when we're talking about the emergency resources I will give you all in a little bit. When you're processing grief and loss, right now with your young people, with, again, the recent events that have happened to our township, you want to engage in what we call active listening. So kind of like how I'm engaging with you guys now, right? I am imagining I'm making eye contact with you. I have devices turned off, right? I am turned towards you. I am open and relaxed in my posture. I'm not looming or being intense, right, with my delivery. I'm going to validate the child's emotion and say, I get it. It's okay. It makes sense that you feel completely overwhelmed right now. That's safe to say. And then maintaining that connection with them in that dialogue. Now, for certain groups of our young people, especially those in the LGBTQIA plus community, they are at elevated risk for thoughts of suicide and for acting on those thoughts of suicide. They're 4 times more likely to seriously consider suicide, make a plan, and attempt versus their peers who do not identify as LGBTQIA+. There is a huge risk in coming out as a member of that community to parents, to peers, to in the broader school community. Kids who come from environments who reject their identity are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide. The Trevor Project, which I will have links on at the end of the presentation, they estimate that one LGBTQ youth between the ages of 13 and 24 attempts suicide every 45 seconds in the US. This is truly a mental health epidemic that our young people are dealing with. This epidemic is hitting that much harder in a real significant way for our LGBTQIA+ youth. If that is a group that your young person identifies with, please have these conversations with them. Come alongside them. Be aware that they're at higher risk. And the links to the research there is at the bottom as well. Now, what you can do as parents, right, to model and share appropriately. Share emotions frequently, even those that don't feel positive, right? So as a young parent and learning a lot and messing up a lot, right? I used to think I'm not going to show any bad emotion in front of my daughter, right? I don't want her to see me cry. I don't want her to see me angry. If she never sees me show that emotion, she's not going to learn that it's okay. It's healthy. She's also not going to know how I cope with it, how I deal with it. And so sharing your emotion and labeling them to your young people is incredibly healthy and such a sign of strength and commitment to their emotional development and mental health well-being. Think about adding little things to your routine that you already do. We are all insanely busy. And so, for example, do a feelings check-in at the dinner table or in the car between drop-offs. You can still ask them how their day went, right? But ask them, hey, what emotions did you feel today? And was there any time today where you felt mad or upset or overwhelmed, frustrated, worried? Show your kids how you're behaviorally managing stress, right? So I'll even tell my 5-year-old, hey, mommy's going to the gym. I'm going to miss you, but mommy has to go to the gym to feel maybe not so worried sometimes. Okay. Take time outs to cool and soothe emotions. So I love this term time out. Think about not time out like go stick your nose in the corner, Tiffany, but time outs like timeouts in sports. They're super valuable, right? And what do we do during a timeout? All the action stops. We regroup. Maybe we step back for a minute. We cool the emotions down using that prefrontal cortex. We really help engage that way of thinking through things and slamming the brakes on impulsivity. And we show that and demonstrate that to our young people. So even calling timeouts, suggesting timeouts in our family unit, incredibly cool and helpful. Please think about saying no to certain engagements. Check in with your young people and how stretched thin they are, right? So I can tell when I'm stretched thin because I start dropping balls and my house is more in disarray, right? There's signs that your young people are stretched thin. I know you know them, whether they're especially quiet, right? Or they're even more withdrawn, or you look at them and they just look exhausted. Consider that a warning sign, right? And maybe say no to some things. Take a break as a family. Give them some room to do that. Exercise is a fantastic, phenomenal buffer against depression. It's even more powerful than any depression-based medication we have. Is physical activity, 20 minutes, heart rate above resting. Ideally 3 times a day. If you can swing it every day, that's fantastic. Positively reinforce other adults, modeling appropriate emotion, right? Your kids are watching you. So if you see another adult being tearful, and you make kind of maybe a not so sensitive comment about that, right? Like they need to suck it up, right? Or pull it together, right? They have a job to do. Your kids take notes on that. And then your kid might be that much more reluctant to share or show their emotion. Okay. We've all been there. We have all messed up. I will be the first to admit it. I'll be the front of the line. When you can say, hey, that was so touching of your coach to be tearful when you guys played the way that you did. That is reinforcement. That's saying that that's okay. And that's a healthy behavior. And then if you've had mental health treatment or care, consider sharing that with your young person. What's more powerful than to say, hey, it's really not that scary. And in fact, I got a lot out of it. It really helped me. Okay. Especially in family gatherings, holiday gatherings, what an opportunity to have a really cool discussion over a dinner table or after unwrapping gifts, right? So please take advantage of those opportunities. Now, what do I do if my kid's at risk for suicide, right? Erica, I've listened to some of your warning signs. I have some concerns, right? What do I do next? So talking to your kid decreases risk. Listen actively without judgment. Again, put those screens away. Use what we call open-ended questions. So instead of asking them a yes, no, like, are you overwhelmed, right? And they say, yeah, right? Say, what emotions are you having today? Or, man, I'm really concerned about you being overwhelmed. Can you tell me when that tends to happen for you? Is it certain parts of your day? If so, which ones do you think? You can say phrases like, tell me more, right? Encourage them to open up. Try not to jump to problem solve or fix the issue for them. Again, guilty. Sometimes caregivers, you default to that problem solving mode, right? I'm just gonna jump in and fix it for them. That denies them the opportunity to address it and start to on their own. But it also then, if they want to share emotion and you jump into solve it mode, right? Then that can shut them down right away. Right? And likely has. I'm sure all of us can think of a time when we have done that with our young people or with our kids or with our partners. Leave an open invitation, but also check in regularly. So a lot of times with the best of intentions, we tell people like, I'm here if you need me, like anything you need, I'm there, right? That assumes that the person knows what they need and that they're going to remember to reach out to you, and they're going to reach out to you even though they might feel like a burden in doing so, right? And so also check in regularly. Okay. Also give your teen or young person other options for other trusted adults. And so asking them, hey, would you rather speak to our neighbor? What about your uncle? What about your swim coach? Okay, or therapist. Don't wait for our kids to come to us. So we have to take a proactive approach. Again, I'm here if you need me is a little too passive. It assumes that they know what they need and how to get it. Establishing, building and rebuilding trust is sometimes difficult. So again, it is basically guaranteed as a parent or caregiver that you are going to do something that is going to result in your kid not trusting you as much, right? So like I make a promise, a pinky promise to my 5-year-old and I break it. I forget it, right? And I can see it on her face and it hurts her in that moment, right? And so sometimes we're not sure how to navigate that ground. You acknowledge their emotion, you validate it, and then you seek out opportunities to rebuild that trust, right? I want to do better. Help me do better. What would have been more helpful or useful when your teen or adolescent's ready to come and talk with you? Communicate your intention. That can seem like a duh, right? That I'm here for you. I care about you. I love you. Sometimes we don't say it enough of, hey, I'm not trying to nag you. I promise I'm not trying to keep you from playing your video games at all. You are the most important thing to me. I just want to check in on your emotion. You've been more quiet at dinner lately. Could we have 5 minutes? Just 5 minutes for you and I to chat, no phones. And see if that can help strike that conversation and that common ground. Kids are, they might feel ostracized or soloed out if they're pulled out of class or a practice to meet, to talk about their mental health or their mood, right? Sometimes we don't have a choice. We have to do that. And sometimes that's the best thing they need. Other times that might bring on like embarrassment or hesitancy to open up. And so if you're able to plan to meet or talk with your kid when they're not in a peer group. Or another strategy is to check in with all the kids. So if you're a family of 4, right, then you're going to maybe around the dinner table or before you put a show on that you guys watch, check in with every member of the family. Again, so it doesn't feel like it's a targeted check-in. Or if your teen has their close group of friends over and they're going to go hang out, right? And like Tiffany said, she has the privilege of having a close relationship with some of our young people. I know that's the case. Even with my 5-year-old, there are neighbors in the community on our street that she gets along well with and will open up to. Check in on all of them. Say, hey guys, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How are things going with everybody? If you have concerns about your child or teen's mental health, take action is the bottom line. We'll give you resources and strategies to take different types of action, but do something as a parent, right? We definitely take action around other things. I know I take action if my daughter is leaving all of her dirty laundry on the floor, or I take action when, I don't know, something, I get a note home from school and we have to remedy something, right? Please, with the same level of seriousness and intensity, take action on mental health. Our kids, we owe that to our kids. When to seek an emergency evaluation. So you're going to call 911 or immediately go to any emergency room, including like closer to us might be Mercy Anderson or Children's Hospital Medical Center. If your child or teen is experiencing a medical emergency, a life-threatening mental health crisis, or they're directed to go there by a medical provider. If they endorse thoughts about ending their life with intent, like I want to die, right? I'm going to make it so I don't wake up tomorrow. I know nobody's going to miss me when I'm gone, right? They're already talking about what they plan to do. That's an emergency, a mental health emergency. If you find them in a position where you think they might be trying to attempt to end their life, right? Maybe they have something in front of them that they could take or do that you know could be lethal, right? Or potentially lethal. They might try to talk you out of acting and just say, oh, I was just holding on to this, or this, you know, this spilled and I had to pick it up, right? right? Do the conservative thing and take them for a medical evaluation. Taking them to the hospital is not a guarantee they're going to be admitted. You are putting them in front of a physician, a qualified medical professional who's going to, in that place and time, thoroughly assess their safety. If they have intentionally or accidentally overdosed on something, they're unresponsive, they're very slow to respond, their pupils are dilated, maybe anything, prescribed over-the-counter medication, substances, alcohol. If you don't know what it is, that's okay. If they're unresponsive, that is potentially a medical as well as a mental health emergency. Immediately call 911. Now, adolescents and teens who are listening to this call and or your parents, please right now save this number. Take a picture of this slide. This is a crisis hotline. You can also just say suicide to Siri. So if you have an iPhone, an iPad, anything, it's an Apple product, if you say the word suicide, it will start dialing this crisis hotline, okay? There's also a Hamilton County text line and a national text crisis line. I know for a lot of our young people, imagining calling someone is maybe like the last thing you would do on a typical average day, right? And you'd rather text. You can text those resources in addition to others I've posted, like the National Suicide Hotline. I'm going to give folks one more, couple more seconds to take a picture of this. Please, if you don't take a picture of any other slide, take one of this one. Now, reducing access to means for suicide. So there are certain means, ways in which a person might attempt to end their life. Again, knowing this information is not placing our young people at further risk, okay? This is such an important conversation to have. These are steps you can already take in your home to reduce risk, right? Just like we have our teens put a seatbelt on, we need to have any guns and any other weapons like knives, for example, under lock and key. So if that's going to be something in your home, it needs to be locked up. It needs to be in a safe. Ideally, that is in a place where the lock or the locking mechanism is not known to your adolescent or teen. If you think it's compromised, you're going to get a new lock or send a new code. Gun locks are available at the Anderson Township Sheriff's Office. If you'd like to turn in a gun or a weapon, you can also do that at the Anderson Township Sheriff's Office. You absolutely have got to remove weapons from the home if there are concern for mental health issues. It can be temporary, but this is a concrete step, an easy enough step for us to take to protect our young people. Let's say you're not willing to do that, right? We have the right to decide kind of what we have in our homes. Absolutely, we do. Then if you can, remove some of the lethal steps. So take the ammunition out of the gun, store the ammunition separate from the gun. With medication, be mindful about what types of medication you have in your home and how lethal they are. You can check that online. You can ask your prescriber. You might talk to your child's prescriber about limiting how much of a certain medication they fill at any one time and limit access to certain over-the-counter meds as well. With psychotherapy, seeking therapy with a counselor, for something like anxiety or depression, oftentimes we're talking about considering a medication, again, for the brain. It's very much a brain-based issue, just like we take a medication for headaches, right? And therapy. There are different types of medication providers. Those I listed in the second bullet down where it says pediatricians. There's also different types of mental health providers. That's in the third bullet down. That is just to give you guys the lingo to know who those qualified people are. To prescribe medications is the middle one, and to provide therapy or testing is the third one down. Okay, so like myself, I'm a psychologist. I cannot and do not prescribe medication. School-based resources. So there's counselors. School is typically unable to provide medication, just so you know that. And then school psychologists are often, they do a phenomenal job. They provided phenomenal resources. They do a lot of testing in the district. And so please contact your school for more information. I won't comment on what the school psychologist in any district or school provide or don't provide. But just as parents, so you know, if your child needs weekly therapy, for example, check in with the school. If the school's unable to provide that, then you'd want to seek that outside. It's important to find clinicians who are trained to treat youth and who use science-based, evidence-based treatment. Okay, so I'm giving you guys that lingo again, so you can ask that mental health provider or that psychiatrist, hey, do you treat kids? Do you treat what we call in the medical field pediatrics, right? Do you use science to inform how you treat them or what therapy you use? Now, making meaning is important too, and how we interpret suicide tragedies at home with our kids. So there's certain biases that we are all vulnerable to as human beings, right? And a bias just means an error in thinking is what I'm presenting. So a hindsight bias, like how many of you have heard of hindsight's like 20/20 vision, right? And so after something happens, we can tend to unfairly judge our actions at the before the trauma happened based on information we only got afterward. Right? So those are the should have, would have, could haves, or the if onlys, or I let or allowed it to happen, right? So after we find out that a young person's life ends, right? Then we might say, I should have called that person. I should have checked in on him. I know that she was having a difficult time, right? Those should have, would have, could haves are toxic. That guilt is not yours. We did not know, right? We did not know until after the traumatic event occurred. This is huge. If this is present, your young person's articulating this or is stuck on this, again, have more conversations about it. If it's something that you can't kind of balance and remedy on your own, then you might involve a mental health professional to assist them with that, okay? Another bias is called just implicit biases. And so again, a very kind of jargon, sciencey term, what implicit means is that we're more unaware of it. So explicit are things that we are aware of and we would share, right? So I am biased to get my coffee from this place and I like this place more, right? Versus implicit is things we're not necessarily even aware of or conscious of, but it's still kind of popping out in like our language that Tiffany mentioned earlier. And so, for example, we might have like assumptions, just that the person must not have had mental health treatment, right? They must not have been connected. It's not uncommon for the person to be connected in some way. Or the implicit assumption that if our kids are really high performing, they're doing really well, they're excelling in some way, that they are okay, they're protected. I don't need to check in about their emotions because look how well they're doing, right? Or an assumption that like bullying was involved or other students are to blame. Again, sometimes some of these components might be the case, but if we jump to an assumption or conclusion, again, it can send a message to our young people that we've already kind of made our mind up, or we have a certain way of looking at it. And so please, we all have these. I caution you to identify it, hear it in your language, right? And then catch it and correct it. This is another crisis resource if you want to snap a picture of it or take a picture as well. So that's to connect with a crisis counselor. Now, I'm almost done, wrapped up. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Promoting recovery after trauma. High perceived social support predicts recovery. So what in the heck is high perceived social support? So it's the extent to which the person who's receiving the support thinks that it's actually helpful. It's actually the kind of help that they want or need in that moment, right? And so it's important that we tell other people what we need specifically moment to moment. This is a really important talking point with our young people and also with ourselves, right? So my best friend since third grade, she recently lost a person in her life she was very close to. And I said, Stacy, don't worry. I'm going to come right over. And I've got a big thing of cheesy pasta and our favorite movie, right? And she says, Erica, I appreciate it, but if we're going to have dinner, can we have something healthy like salmon, and can we go for a run? And I was like, oh, I don't run unless I'm chased, but I will do it for you, Stacy, because that's what she needed. And I would have never known had she not told me, right? And so we have to match the type of support to what the person needs in that moment. So often the person might not know what they need. So make suggestions. Hey, do you need a walk? Always suggest physical activity. Again, remember how protective that is against depression, how helpful it is with anxiety. Ask them about a soothing activity. We listened to some soothing music at the beginning of this presentation. See if they want any kind of physical reassurance, like a hug, right? Or maybe they need time to rest and put away some activities. You can also ask them, hey, do you remember anything that's helped the last time you felt this emotion, right? Get out that emotion chart or any emotion chart and say, what are you feeling? Okay, last time you felt that way, what worked? What was helpful? And then see if you can employ that. Now, parents, please take another photo. Don't put those cameras, those smartphones away of that QPR code in the top corner. So for those of you out there like myself who's thinking, okay, Erica, I've got the strategies for what to do in my house. I have things I'm going to implement with my teen and adolescent. They're here, they're listening. What else can I do? 1 in 5, a phenomenal organization, we have representatives there here on the talk with us, is going to be offering 2 sessions, and likely more, my guess is with the interest of what's called QPR training. That is question, persuade, and refer. It's gatekeeper training for suicide prevention. It's 1 to 2 hour educational program. It helps you identify and respond to warning signs for suicide crisis. This is going to be a lot more practice, kind of in the moment in small groups, kind of talking this through. It's an incredibly important add-on component to the information you received tonight. And so there's a link, but also just that QR code is going to take you right there. If that registration fills up, which I'm guessing it likely will, which is an amazing sign for our community, I'm sure that 1 in 5 will open up very quickly additional trainings for us. And one of the trainings is starting very soon. Anderson area resources. So there are some phenomenal resources right here in our backyard. 1 in 5, their literal mission is exactly what we were talking about today, to prevent suicide by erasing the stigma of mental illness. Stigma means essentially like negative attitudes. Remember we talked about those biases? That stigma can get in the way of addressing what's brain-based. And so with 1 in 5, there's their website, phone number, and contact information. Also, there's Step Up Anderson Township. Director Denise Mayer has led that initiative. These are initiatives and organizations that have been around you guys for years that are science-based, phenomenal. With Step Up Anderson, it's designed at educational programs to assist in drug prevention for the community. And then Beach Acres Parenting Center. So again, right around the corner here in Anderson Township, they have natural strength parent coaching. Again, parents asking, what can I do? I need more skills. I need to practice them. It's 100% complimentary, no cost to you. And they also have an evidence-based social and emotional curriculum that's linked there as well. That's in 40 schools in 7 states. So these are tested programs that we're very excited to offer. Again, take a snapshot of that slide. Local resources for grief and suicide. We have Fernside and Compassionate Friends. Compassionate Friends is for suicide loss survivors. They have a group here in Anderson. Fernside has grief support specifically tailored to children and teens up to age 18. Again, take a quick pic. We'll have this slide for you. Urgent Care Children's has a psychiatric intake response center. It's available 24/7. They can also consult on whether or not your teen or adolescent is in an emergency, right? So if your teen says, I'm going to make it so I don't wake up tomorrow, and you're not quite sure what they meant by that, you can call that hotline and say, hey, do I need to call 911? Do I need to take them down right away? And they can give you guidance and a medical consult. There's child focus with a crisis hotline and mobile crisis team. There's a psychiatric emergency services center at UC Health. That's going to be a especially good resource for our older teens, maybe 18 and up, and an after hours crisis line for UC Health. Please snap a picture of this slide as well. Now, if you are looking for more therapy services in the community and they need a mental health provider, mindpeacecincinnati.com is a searchable database, or there's a phone number where you can call to connect care. So again, if you can take a quick snapshot, everybody will receive a copy of these slides as well. These are additional. A lot of our young people are saying, how do I find therapists? How do I find resources? Each one of these links will help you find a list of qualified mental health providers who specialize in treating adolescents and teens, and also offer things like family therapy. Many of these also accept a broad range of insurance, Medicaid, and have financial assistance for those who might need it or have no insurance. These are evidence-based resources for kids and teens that'll be sent out to you all, as well as for parents. And then I wanted to end on, if there's additional conversation, action you want to take as a parent, we have formed a task force on student mental health. We are meeting tomorrow night at the Anderson Center and via Zoom at 7 p.m. For details, you can look at those links provided and message us. And then I'd like to thank all of our partners when we couldn't do this without them. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And we're going to turn over the speaker role right now.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you for the information. It was very, very timely and good information. I think now we're going to turn, if we do have time for question and answers. I've been monitoring some of the question and answers, and I've answered probably most of them, but one came in, Erica, here at the end. Someone is asking, the question was the last 4 suicides in Forest Hill School District were boys. Boys and men are 2 to 4 times more likely to commit suicide than girls and women. Why was this information not part of the presentation? Can you address that real quickly?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So thank you for bringing up that statistic, and something that we've seen, fortunately, close to home. With that information in the presentation, I absolutely appreciate you volunteering that information. With the time and just how we structured the presentation, I'm sure there are things that we missed, and that is on me, and I apologize for that sincerely. And if there are things that we've missed and you absolutely want to share, if you can put that in the comments or continue to ask questions and educate all of us on the call, I greatly and humbly appreciate it. Thank you.
That is a statistic that boys are more likely.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, then we have another question. What can we be doing at the state level, if anything, to help our local communities?
So this is Tiffany Kimble again. And one thing that was particularly upsetting during our trying to treat our son Ben is because we did he missed so much school for appointments and things of that nature. We actually got a letter from the state alerting us about our truancy. And again, it was just like, are you serious? I'm trying to help my kids stay alive. So things that we can do at the state, the state of Oregon, for example, has passed a law that mental health days are a valid reason, and they're excused absences from school. I know myself, my kids, and a lot of my friends, you have the stomach ache, or the kids don't sleep. So that is one thing we can absolutely do to the state, is we can lobby to bring parity to mental health versus physical health and have excused absences.
Okay, thank you, Tiffany. Okay, now here's another question. Do teens typically answer honestly when asked if they're planning to harm themselves?
That is an excellent question and a notable concern, right? And so there absolutely going to be circumstances where no, they may not answer honestly for lots of reasons, including fear that the parent will intervene or cause concern, or maybe they're worried they're going to be a burden if they open up and acknowledge that. And so with that concern, which is again, very legitimate, that would be where we would highly suggest you attend to any other warning signs or discrepancies. So if you're asking those questions and you know your child and they're being very defensive, they're shut down, they kind of storm off, they're also isolating and not sleeping well, and you know that they've recently tried out for something and didn't make it, right? That might be enough things to be concerned about to then follow through on and engage them in more conversation, or say, I'm worried about you. I'm really concerned about you. I know that you don't want to go to a pediatrician, but we need to go and talk about how your mental health is doing. It's more important than anything. And I'm going to demonstrate that by taking off work and taking you myself, so we can do this as a unit, as a family.
If I could add one risk that, or a pitfall that we fell into, is that not being dishonest, but aspirational. The kids are aspirational because they know that you don't want to know that they're hurting. They don't want to disappoint you. They don't want to upset you. So some of the conversations that we had were, the answers were aspirational. How are you feeling? I'm feeling okay. It wasn't really that they were actually feeling okay, but you wanted to feel okay. And that's what you're projecting in your answer. And as parents, we want to hear those things. And so, I would just caution that sometimes what our kids say and what we hear has an aspirational component to it. And we really need to be able to have the wherewithal to try to determine, is this being honest, or is this maybe a wishful, little bit of that in there.
Yeah.
Okay, and just so people know, if you're paying attention to the questions and answers, there's more resources. There's resources from Beach Acres. Beach Acres is offering, individualized coaching sessions for your family. And the link is on if you look at the questions and answers. And it looks like there's also information from Anderson Hills psychology. I can't, it's broken up on my screen. I can't read the whole thing, but there's therapy. It's a list of therapists, a Google sheet with therapists with current openings. So this is very timely information. And there's a comment from Susan Shelton, and I believe talk with about, please, at the state level, please consider advocating for real parity for private insurance coverage of mental health. Talk with your employers about this. Reimbursement by Medicaid and private insurers for therapies is very low, and this is a driver behind the workforce crisis of therapists. Mental health treatment is just as important as treatment of chronic conditions, and I'm sure we can all agree on that. So thank you for that, Susan. So,
Dee, if I could add,
yes.
the state in which your medical insurance is domiciled, it has a factor bearing on the treatment that you have for mental health coverage as well. States like Massachusetts have more liberal mental health guidelines, so you are allowed more visits for therapy and things of that nature. The state of Ohio is administered more closely, and there's much more limitations on that. So it really shocked me in our journey to discover that there were those type of differences. And so that's another thing that the state, we can do at the state level.
Okay. Well, I don't see any. I think we've answered all the questions. We're getting a lot of comments in the chats that are going directly to the panelists. Just thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Tiffany and Erica, for your time. Thank you, Erica, for putting this together. Mike, Mike is the actual founder of the Anderson Mental Health Collaborative. Mike, did you want to say a few words before we wrap this up?
Yes, thanks, Dee. I know we're about at 8:30, so I'll be quick. There's just a few things I wanted to point out. I'm an Anderson resident. My wife grew up here. She's a Turpin grad, and I know that's important to the greater Cincinnati area. That's what high school he went to. So yes, she went to Turpin. I have a ninth grader at Anderson, a seventh grader at Nagel, and so I am very much invested in this community, and I care a lot about it. I've founded the collaborative 3 years ago simply because I'm extremely passionate about mental health. I lost my father to suicide when I was 11, and if there's any way I can make a difference, I want to do that when it comes to mental health in this community. A few things. First of all, I want to thank the participants. We had 520 people register for this event. At one point, we had 290 actually participate tonight. I think that's huge. I think that's huge in supporting our youth. It's huge in changing the culture in the Anderson community around mental health. Dr. Birkley talked about stigma, and we need to reduce stigma, and we do that, of course, by education. So thanks for your participation. I want to thank Dr. Birkley, Tiffany, Stacy, Nancy, and Beth. This event doesn't happen tonight without all of their efforts. They, came together over the last 3, 4, 5 days, spent a lot of effort, a lot of time making this happen, and I can't thank all of them enough for doing that. There's a couple other things I want to address. I was looking at some of the questions that came through. A lot of people are asking about, kind of like what the collaborative does, what the purpose is. And so I want to make sure I address that. So the collaborative, it is not a 501c3. It's not a nonprofit. It's not an organization. It is simply a group that was formed to put the key stakeholders and community partners together so that we can share information, we can share what we're doing, we can come together, share best practices, provide resources for the community. This event tonight happened because the collaborative was already having regular meetings. We were already brought together, and so we were able to move quickly to make this happen. And so that's really what the collaborative is. It's a group that is connected, and when there are suggestions from the community, such as putting together an event like this, because of the relationships we have and the things that we have going on, events like this can happen. I also wanted to say that, obviously there's a lot of moving parts right now when it comes to mental health in this community. We are going to circle the wagons, so to speak, in January and think about what we want to do in 2022. Obviously, there's lots of opportunities. I've been contacted by so many people in the community, which is just fantastic. And so we are going to continue to collaborate and work together to help this community. So more to come in January. Also, I'd like to encourage all of you to follow us on our Facebook page, continue to get the word out, participate in the task force that Dr. Birkley has talked about. Again, this is how we reduce stigma. This is how we can rally together as a community to support each other. Also, people have asked me if we have a website. As of right now, we don't. We don't have a budget. And so we do the best we can with getting information out. I'm hoping someday we will have a website, but for right now, we don't. But we'll continue to post on our Facebook page. We post information weekly. So again, I encourage you to check that out. And lastly, I'll end with this. I just encourage you to be kind to each other over these next few weeks, especially. It's the holiday season. Emotions are high anyway during this time of year. And so I just encourage this community, we have to come together. We have to support each other. Just be kind, be thoughtful, be empathetic. And that's going to take us a long way and get us through this difficult time. I'd also like to wish everyone, just a happy holiday season. And of course, we're here. Reach out to us through our Facebook page. If you have ideas, continue to send them our way. And that's all I have.